We believe in this group, in the power of story.
But it didn't work for me.
And it was what made my grandmother tell me all the time, son, you're blessed.
But it saved my life. It redeemed me. It's the way God found me.
All right, everybody. This is the Portland Stories podcast coming back to you, and got a great group of friends with me today. First of all, I got Larry Anderson, full of wisdom and advice. How you doing, Larry?
Hey, Tony. How you doing today?
And Big Greg Taylor, Uncle Greg. How are you, Greg?
Hey, I'm doing good.
Great to see you. Wendell Birkland. How are you, Wendell?
I'm good today.
How's retirement treating you?
It's actually really good. I've just started a new workout program with Nate Moreland. Just advertising for Greg.
And Janus Sanders. How are you, Janus? How are you, my brother?
I'm good, Tony.
It's great to see you guys. First of all, just get started. I'd love to just, this is Thanksgiving week. I'd love to hear something you're thankful for, just to get the conversation rolling. Janus, start with you. What are you thankful for?
No, I'm thankful that I'm in good health. I'm in a good community. It just feels really good. I know that people are struggling, so I'm just really thankful to be with you guys.
Right on. Larry, how about you?
So I'm just thankful for the gift of life, number one. I am thankful that we have an opportunity to be in community, even though we are in isolation. We have the ability to still communicate over the internet. That's good. And I am thankful for the fact that I have people who are worthy to be in communication with. Friendships, acquaintances, colleagues. I'm just so thankful for that. And I'm thankful that even in this time of civil unrest, we can live in peace. And so I'm so grateful for that.
Thank you. Wendell, what are you thankful for?
I'm thankful for the friends on the call. I'm adjusting to Zoom now. And frankly, the Zoom workout works better than a workout in person. You don't have to go to a gym.
This Nate Moreland workout is changing your life, my friend. All you want to talk about.
Massively changed me. I'm going to be extremely buff here pretty soon.
No doubt. I have no doubt. The Crypt Keeper meets the Terminator.
That's hilarious.
Greg Taylor, what are you thankful for?
I'm thankful that Wendell will be able to hit a 300-yard drive in just a second, because that's really important.
There you go.
After that, short game is kind of suspect, but he'll be able to drive the ball 300 yards.
Dream, Greg. Just a dream.
I was thinking the same thing of Larry, that I'm thankful that I have solid relationships, good relationships, not superficial, and I can tell the difference. And so I'm really blessed by y'all to be able to have people I'm in community with, and really good friends. The Bible says that there's a friend that's even closer than a brother, and I have two brothers. And I'm closer to people on this call than I am to my biological brothers. Well, I have a half brother in Tulsa, and so I'm closer to the people on this podcast than I'm even to them, and I spend more time with them. But with a singularity of purpose and direction and some thought. Some of the things we're going to talk about today, I imagine. So I'm thankful for that.
Well, I couldn't ask for a better segue than that. So the topic today is showing up, or the necessity of intentionality in building true community and true relationship. And just kind of to set this up, I want to do a little bit more prologue than I normally would, just to kind of explain kind of where I'm coming from and why this topic is, I think, so necessary for us to talk about. So, Wendell, when was it this group started?
Actually, in 1992, at the prompting of a very dear friend, Vic Anfuso, who felt even though we as men were getting together around our faith and our following of Jesus Christ, we were only meeting with white people. Our country is very divided, very separated based on race historically. and in neighborhoods, regionally, and every other way. And he thought we should be reaching across racial lines. And of course, he then introduced me to Mr. Anderson down there in the corner, who thought that was an idea that was never going to come to fruition, or at least it was unlikely to come to fruition. And Greg was there that first night. I mean, I'm amazed that after all this time, those two faces are still there. There were others that are still part of this, but that's when it started. That's when I was introduced to Larry and Greg.
Okay,
You guys-
so that was 28 years ago. And back in 1992, Dr. Richard White, who is the head of the Urban Studies Department, I think, at Portland State University, he told me that back in 92, that 97% of African Americans lived within 3/4 mile of the intersection of Alberta and Albina in North Portland. 97% of African Americans in the state lived within 3/4 miles of one intersection in North Portland. We were categorized as, and probably still are, as a hyper segregated state, with a very poor history around race relations. And into that zone walks you guys, and a decision to become friends at that point. You weren't friends, and not just to become friends, but to enter into community with one another. Just to, again, just sort of give some of my context. When I came in 15 years ago, when I walked into a room, there were about probably 30 to 40 guys on any Friday morning meeting for about 3 hours at a time. There were guys who were in their 70s and guys who were in their 20s. There were guys who were millionaires, and there were guys who were on welfare. There were black, white, brown, native guys in the room. I watched radical arguments. I even watched at times things where I thought violence would actually break out, where the arguments were strong enough, where people were up in each other's faces. I have watched, and I have been the person who has been put on blast in the room, and being put on blast means that it is 25-1, and the one is. Uh-oh, I think Wendell might have just.
Wendell, you all right, man?
Do we need to call
I'm
911?
all right.
There he is. He's back up.
Coffee and I made a mess.
Wow. Whew.
He was reliving that moment you were describing, Tony.
I don't know
Yeah,
if he
you
was
were in
falling
it.
asleep or what happened.
He was fully in it.
I think he was falling asleep.
You guys keep going. I'll come right back.
Thank you, Wendell.
It was a room where, even though it was a room full of Christian men, like undeniably Jesus followers, that people were willing to swear at each other. They were willing to yell at each other. They were willing to say the hardest thing they could possibly say to try and knock sense into one another. And so as I've traveled around the country and I meet with groups of people, man, I'm getting worried about Wendell.
I'm right here, but
It's all that working out.
Must be. He doesn't know his own strength.
That new foul strip.
He just crushed his coffee cup. Just,
Wendell, you're at a 10. We need you at a 2,
massive.
Wendell.
well, you're not supposed to drink coffee when you're trying to do
angry.
a podcast.
Oh
I
man,
think
Wendell's
that's
still dealing with some of that anger and anxiety, man. You start talking, he start reliving that.
Yeah,
It's like this, Wendell. This is how you do it.
see, it's not anger. I actually had a designation as a child by my father named me Spilly. And I always hated that name, but it was valid. I kept spilling stuff.
You can't get away from it. Huh? You cannot get away from it.
that one's going to stick. That one's going to stick there, Spilly.
So maybe
We put out a national podcast, Philly. Yeah. It's actually the first time I heard that. Well, that's the first. I thought I was your friend. I never heard that one before, Smelly. I have written at you a few times, but
Bruno doesn't like for people to tease him, right?
I don't like that designation. I never liked it. I thought it was
Welcome to the club.
my father to name me.
Have a name like Janus.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. We're moving on.
There
Keep
we
going,
go.
Tony. Take this thing back, Tony.
we started.
All right, I'm back.
We started to deal with some of the intentionality of our purpose.
All right. Just,
Yeah.
everyone is witnessing. They are witnessing community. So when I have had.
That couldn't have happened to a nicer person, Wendell.
Thank you.
It's true, Billy.
Come on, Philly. You back with us, Philly?
So
Yeah,
I have probably been in 50 conversations with people who would say that they're justice people who would say that they're activists, people, white, black, and brown people, like, who have said that they literally do not believe that this group exists, or they don't believe they cannot fathom a group like this would last 28 years. And I would say picking up speed. The group is in many ways getting healthier and stronger than it's ever been. And that they've stayed together, that Wendell, you and Larry stay together, even though when you guys met, Larry was a police officer and you were a defense lawyer. I mean, in every sense of society, you guys should have been on opposite sides of the table, and somehow you've chosen to come to the same side of the table and live life. Larry, I think about you and Michael Fesser, who's not here, but you and Fesser started out as actual enemies.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, Michael was somebody that was on my list of people I thought I was probably going to have to kill or be killed by. That's how serious that was.
Yeah, because he was gangbanging in the city when he was a young man, and you were trying to hunt him down as a police officer.
Well, he was more than a gangbanger. He was an instigator of the whole madness that was going on. So he was a corrupter of those who were actually participating in the activity, and so he had a greater influence than just what he did individually. So he was always a target of the police bureau. And we grew up. I grew up in this household as a young man, teenager. We used to go over to his mother's house. She would allow us to go downstairs and have our little parties and get-togethers. And Michael was just a little kid running around. So neither one of us foresaw the fact that we would one day be in a role that would pit us as bitter enemies towards one another. Were we actually considering getting rid of the other? And I actually thought at some point in my career, and there's only a few people that I talked about, and Michael was number 2 on that list of who I thought I would actually have to kill, or our encounter would be so violent that one of us could be dead. And we had that perception of each other for years. And it's amazing now of the fact that we sit in the same room together and actually consider each other friends. That is a miracle. I don't know how that happens.
You guys love each other. I mean, you guys, I watch it. I just watch it. You guys love each other.
Sure.
You show up every week together in the same room.
Exactly. And I remember the first time Michael showed up, and came in and sat down in the group, and I couldn't believe it. And then what he said to me when he invited me to go to his church, when he actually asked to be forgiven if he's done anything wrong. First time that happened. And here I am, a religious guy who believed in forgiveness, who considered forgiving people myself. It was all bullshit, of course, because it was all contrived. And this was a real world, authentic presentation of what that looked like when Michael Fesser walked out of that line in the restaurant and confronted me and said, "If there's anything I've done to you, brother, I'm sorry." And at the time he told me that, I had my hand on my gun because I thought this was it. And he came back and said, and I came back to the group one of the following Friday fellowship and said, "You guys won't believe what just happened to me," because they had heard about the Michael Fesser story, right? I said, "You won't believe what I just experienced." And I said, this same guy who was with another guy who was as notorious comes back and not only asks for forgiveness and offers his apology, but he comes back later and invites me to his church.
And
unbelievable.
There's a lot of people who talk big about this stuff. They talk big about race relations and, tension in relationships, whatever. What Larry's talking about, there's no hyperbole in this.
No, you can't. That's not a scripted thing.
Wanting to kill each other is literally what he's talking about. He's not being metaphoric. And then to be where they are brothers and they love each other's families and they meet together and they care for each other now, to me, it's just amazing. Same thing.
And we come together in the company of those who understood our previous positions and question the validity of it. I bring Mike to me when I go to my things that happen to be with police officers who understand who Mike is, and they question our relationship all the time. What are you doing with that guy? And my answer is quite simple. I don't try to explain it. I just say Mike is my brother and he's my friend.
So one of the mottos of the Friday community is that I think, Greg, I got from you, honestly, is show up. Just step one is you got to show up. And so, Greg, could you just talk a little bit about what that means to you? Because you've modeled that for me. You've definitely smacked me across the head a few times to tell me to show up more. So can you talk about what that means?
Yeah. It's about being intentional about what our Father would have you to do in his relationships. And so if you view that relationships are in his providence, and that he's called you to an assignment, he literally says, this is what I want you to do. And that is with people, then you're responsible for that assignment. And in order to be able to have a relationship or to be able to fulfill that assignment, you have to show up. It's kind of like being assigned to a class, and if you never go to class, you never get you can't really, you can't really follow through on what it is with that class, never learn from it, never actually finish that class. If I can use that analogy. And so when I was in college, I didn't like to go to class. So I just read the book and did the best I could on the test. Well, in this particular assignment, it doesn't work like that. Now, there's no book. In fact, the book is the one that tells you that you need to go to class. And so showing up and being intentional about showing up is just, in my mind, is recognizing what the Father will have you to do. And then the blessing is in obedience. Now, is it a pain? Yeah. Are people a lot of times unloving? Yeah. Or sometimes is it everything? We were just talking before we got on a podcast. I want to say this in the nicest way I can. White evangelicals make me want to hit them in the face as hard as I possibly can. And I'm 6'3" over 300 pounds, and that would really hurt somebody. Okay? But some of the things that they do is just unbelievable. Having an argument about putting children in cages on the southern border, as if that's okay. Or having people stand in cages on our southern border, and they have to. Some people have to stand, other people have to take turns laying down because it's just not enough room to lay down. Taking children away from their parents, and I mean the list goes on and on. It's like, how in that world can you say that, or even that be in your heart, and then have a relationship with the Father? But the intentionality is that I really genuinely and in my heart believe that the only way that you can have this kind of realness in what the Father will have you do were two, and by the way, I grew up with Larry, and I was in the same basement having the same fun with Michael Fesser, and when this little snot nose is around, because that was Michael Fesser, and so I remember that. But these relationships that you can literally be thinking that I might have to kill this individual, and then have the Father work out the relationship where now you're actually friends and you're in this relationship together and do what the Father had you do together. That's the only way this really works, is to recognize who it is that is giving you an assignment and then being obedient to that. And then the other side of that is the blessing. I'm not saying it's easy. Yeah, I'm just thinking that he didn't call us, our Father didn't call us the easy, he called us the purpose.
So, Janus, why is showing up so hard? And the reason I'm asking you is you were kind of the poster child for about 5 to 7 years of a guy who came when he wanted to, and when life was getting hard, you would disappear from the community for a year at a time, and then you'd come back and just sort of want to start back up, and then you'd split. And then something happened 5 years ago or something where you locked in and you decided that showing up was no longer going to be optional. Can you just talk about what makes intentionality show up so hard, and then what it took for you to say, no, it's worth it to be in life with assholes like me?
Yeah, let's see. I was about 37 years old when I was invited to the group by Richard Twist, friend of the family. Married, kids, career. I was a guy who did everything perfectly, especially someone with brown skin. It's pretty difficult task. But I was in deep conflict and didn't know it. And so Richard brought me to the group. I showed up, and Richard left. And so I was sitting here by myself in the midst of Larry and this group. And it was the first time in 37 years that I've actually had an honest conversation. I didn't even know it. And I went home and I realized something was wrong. But the one thing that seemed right was this conversation. It completely stunned me. I was just stunned to a point where I had to go back and figure out what happened. So I come back and I go home with conflict. And so sometimes the conflict took longer to deal with because I had to deal with that conflict in the midst of, you know, my surrounding environment, what I was learned to believe as a person, my identity. And so when I come back, we'd have these serious conversations. They were honest, they were vulnerable, many times traumatic, but ultimately I realized the trauma was because of my internal conflict. And Friday Group gave me a bigger context. I was missing that. Everything that I've learned and knew, and in this small, localized context was not enough to resolve the deeper things going on in my life. And so now going to Friday Group, I can actually now hold these things and choose what I want in life, choose how I want to feel about something. And the more we spent time together, the bigger the context, the more I go, oh. And then I was allowed to speak into that as an individual from my own perspective. And I'm like, oh. And then I see people getting changed on top of that. And they come back and then they're dealing with conflict. And so over time, those who come back and stay and who contribute ultimately, we're all doing the same thing. We're having a sense of awe and wonder and discovery. And then we go home and this is how it always was. This is how you should do it. This is how it should look. This is how it should be. And I'm like, no, it's not. And so I choose to come back to Friday Group because everything else seems like it's death.
It's not easy though. I mean, I've wanted to bag out a dozen times.
And you have.
Actually, I've never stopped coming, but I think I've stopped showing up full self in the room. Absolutely. And I can remember
Right.
And Larry, I can remember multiple speeches, you know, I don't need you people. I would rather be hunting. I don't need this shit. On and on and on. I mean, we all get there in the midst of it, right?
I think I heard that speech.
I've heard it more than once.
It was a torturous process because everything that I had thought I understood was a lie, Tony.
Yeah.
And people talk about being honest, but it's about authenticity. And you know, our honesty is a sham. When we start getting down to, you know, people call the real deal, and that was my lament. I don't want to go through this process of exposure to become authentic because it's just too painful.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to medicate. I want to drink. I want to get involved in sexual behavior. I want to do all the things that mitigate this terrible sense of pain and loss that I actually am living. And I don't want anybody to talk to me about that. I don't want that to be exposed. And I don't want to deal with that. And so when people force me to that, I lash out and become violent. And these men would not go away. It would not be scared off. It would not be intimidated. It wasn't that it wasn't frightening moments. We had some real frightening moments. But we discovered that our Father who had put this together, who confirmed this in our hearts and brought us together, is bigger than all of that. And yeah, I can remember a lot of times, you know, y'all heard my lament. I hate this. I don't, you know, I remember telling Wendell when he first came and Greg was a witness in my house, I don't need any friends, especially no old white friends. I got enough friends, man. I don't need I don't need to have new friends. I'm not unhappy.
Right.
I'm not a mission field. I got a job. I got a wife. I got a house. I pay my bills. I'm not destitute. I'm not a project.
Right.
I don't need you guys to fix me. because I'm not broken. What a crock of shit. You know, you're all of that. You're a mess. You're broken. You're disappointed. You've lost faith and confidence in humankind. And so you're on a suicidal path to destruction, drunk out of your mind. And to have people talk to you about that in a real way, in the light and not in the darkness. Oh yeah, who in their right mind want to be a part of that? But you know what? That's the very thing that delivers us.
Right. But we're sold a lie. We're sold that friendship is about finding people with as few hurdles as possible to be in life with. People that think just like you and live just like you, in a house just like you, and looks like you, and votes like you. That's who you want to be in life with. That's what friendship is about. Friendship's about compatibility, and we are not a compatible community.
No.
So, but Larry, you just said that was actually a lie.
It's a straight up lie, Tony. All of it is a lie, and is steeped in fear and hopelessness, and that your actual salvation is to walk into the face of that, and that the Father, through his grace, gives us other men that will walk with you so that you don't have to walk alone. See, I never believed that. I never thought that, you know, when it got really hot and stuff got really real and we really got down to what was really the problem is, that people would bail, because we're a bunch of cowards, including myself. We bail. You know, we really don't care. And what I found out is that there's a few men that do. And man, that changed everything. Now, mind you, we did everything we could to run each other off. We came with our worst behavior, you know, we came with our worst fears, and, you know, and we came with all the phoniness of our false identities, all the lies that we've been taught to believe about each other, including this thing about a separation of race based on skin color, which is not foundational to the Bible whatsoever, but we've accepted it in our culture, and we treat each other accordingly. And we found out, oh, that's a lie. And so then if that's a lie, I don't know what the truth is.
So Greg, how is intentionality not the same thing as agreement?
The intentionality, in essence, forces you to be in the same room or in the same space with someone that you could reach agreement with if, in fact, you allow the Spirit to lead and guide, and then be responsible for the results. And then some people back away, like Janus was a roller coaster for a while. It got a little warm for him, and so, or it hit too close to home, and then he said, it's a little too warm in here. I got another friend of mine that I say the same thing about. And so you have to be in the same space in order to be able to come to agreement. But sometimes that's really difficult, what Larry was talking about. The intentionality for me is recognizing that this is what the Father would have me to do. And then when I didn't do it, suffer the consequences. Another friend of mine says, your arms are too short to box with God. And so after a couple of boxing matches, I realized, well, you know, that was painful. I don't want to do that. In fact, it was really painful. I didn't want to do that again. And recognizing that when I did his will, even though it was really painful for me, the results was a blessing. And so hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, I mean, you just been a model for me in this area, and I mean, I've heard you say before that who wants to go listen to a band where everyone's playing the same instrument? Like that is not the essence of the human experience, and yet that's the lie that you should go out and you should make a band of all tubas.
Yeah.
Well, that idea is the same, that, you know, we can all agree to believe a lie or accept a lie, but we have to be intentional about pursuing the truth in spite of what we may believe or agree about, because oftentimes it is in our disagreement that we discover the truth. It's not in our sameness. Everybody be the same. The goal is not to be the same.
Right.
Unity and being the same is not the same thing. But our intentionality is what keeps us showing up. That no matter what happens, my intention is to keep showing up, keep participating, keep staying in there until the truth be known, or something that resembles what we think the truth might be. But whatever happens, our intention is that we're going to be there to witness it. And so a lot of times that has nothing to do with what we've agreed on or disagree about. It's in spite of that.
Right. Right. And intentionality both means that I bring my whole self, which means I bring my opinions and the ways that I disagree into the room, because I have to bring my whole self, not sit and just, be all just soft and just a spectator. So that needs to happen. And then on the other hand, and I've witnessed this 150 times in group. Some guy comes as a tourist, and then he starts to hang his opinions out there, and then gets ass hurt because everyone won't agree with them or won't acknowledge the fact that he's the smartest person who's ever walked in the room, and he's brought in this genius idea that we all just need to genuflect to or whatever. And when he gets told, you're just a dude, shut up, listen, learn, be a part of the conversation. You're not in charge here. You don't get to hold court in this room. And then they never come back again because their identity is so wedded to being they live their life. And I mean, a lot of the guys who come in the group they're CEOs of companies. They're used to being at the head of the table, and they walk into a room and there's people in the room that don't look like them who suddenly go, no, I've got my thoughts are just as important as yours, and maybe more important. And maybe you should learn to shut up for a while for your sake, not for my sake, for your sake. Why don't you learn to shut up for a while? And that doesn't go over well because we have a false understanding of salvation. That my reality, my truth, my goodness, my value is that I'm right and other people acknowledge that. And that's not what it is at all.
Exactly.
It's the fact that you're loved despite where you're wrong. Or as you're working through what could be right or could be true. Like Wendell, you get in these conversations a lot with guys who say that like Friday group is just, it's not real because it's arbitrary and it's forced, as opposed to being a natural gathering, which goes back to that ease thing.
Yeah, but if we gather naturally, we gather in places where we all look the same. That idea that 97% of the Black people lived in, close to that intersection in Northeast Portland, that was because of the Red Line. It was done because of historical issues of separation. I mean, I can wind up living my whole life with only white people. That was really the beginning of our coming together. And the reality when Greg says, you white evangelicals make me want to punch you in the face, it takes a while before you understand what he means by that. And of course, thankfully, he didn't punch me in the face because he's a lot bigger than I am. It would have been a bad thing, at least for me. But we don't understand those things. We don't understand those differences. And, I've been steeped religiously in these commands of Jesus to love God and love your neighbor. But if the neighbor looks different than I am, and he talks different than I am, and he seems hostile, well, why does he seem hostile? Because of the hostility that's been given to him by our country and our society for years. I mean, I knew that there were differences and hostilities between different groups, but I never took ownership for it or understood my role in that. And, that's part of what we're dealing with. I mean, I knew that some young Black men didn't like me, so I avoided them, but I didn't understand why they didn't like me. After all, I'm such a likable guy, we should be buddies. But, there's a history there. And, you know, one of the most convicting things that a friend ever said to me there was, you're one of them. Who are them? Well, they're the people that have oppressed me my whole life. They're the people that have exercised the privilege to suppress my family and have caused injustice to flow down in my direction. Hold it. I'm a good guy. How can that be? That's the hard part to grasp. And that's the part that takes time. And when I would hear that with a note of hostility from Larry, then I'd have to be taken aside by Greg to interpret what Larry really meant. And I've always been thankful for that. You know, I mean, God is a big God, and he knows how to educate and teach if you're willing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting to me that Larry and Greg and Leonard Lambreth were lifelong friends. Very different men, both in emotion and in appearance and attitude. But as a team, they were a great educational group to show me who I was to them, who I'd been to them, which I didn't even see.
This is where community, intentional community, is greater than relationship. Because in relationship, all you have is the other person that you're bouncing off of, right? But when you enter a community, suddenly you have multiple translators around the room. You have multiple perspectives to help flesh out an idea, and you get to watch truth being manifested between the others while you sit and get to be in the first row of the kingdom of God.
That's right.
Watching conflict being resolved, watching truth being wrestled with, watching lies run rampant, and then hopefully being resolved. You get to watch it. And it's really a gift.
It is. It is what being a witness is all about. I get to be a firsthand witness. And, you know, one of the things that's really tough for people to discover is that they are part of the group that hate it. You know, they always talk about, well, you know, I believe you hated me, but where we learn hatred from. And to be a part of a group that hate it, in any aspect of that, in the initiators or the reactionaries, to be a part of the hated group, you know, the ones that has grievance cause to take issues, we all have to be delivered of that. And the only way that we can be delivered is the process the Father has brought us by bringing us together, men who are so different from each other that it would be impossible for us to reconcile in and of our own ability. And when we watch our Father move miraculously through these men in reconciliation, all you can do is give him the glory, because to witness that is what it is. You are a witness, and our testimony is true. And our testimony is true by the way we live our lives now, because we are in fact friends who were once enemies. We actually love each other who once hated each other. And that love is demonstrated by the fact that we value not lying to one another. And we're not going to participate in the lies and the falsehoods. And sometimes that causes conflict, but that conflict is what somebody calls good conflict. It's the kind of thing that liberates one from the bonds of the lies. And so we always invite good conflict. And so a lot of people, if you've never experienced that before, you don't know the difference, because the good conflict can also look like the thing that causes all the trouble. It can result in separation and violence. But we can say that while we've had some hands-on ministries where we actually put the hands on each other, we have never had violence. We have never resulted in violence where people were hurt or harmed. And that is a blessing from the Most High, because the situations that we were dealing with were of the most violent nature.
Yeah.
How have and this is a topic that you guys might want to disagree with me on this one. I think we got a mixed report on. I think we have a mixed history on. But as far as going and getting guys who isolate, disappear, I don't know that we've done a great job of doing that. But at times we have. Like, you guys have any thoughts on the role and intentionality that I'm also somewhat responsible for the other person to show up?
Sure.
Can you weigh into that? Maybe Greg, you could weigh into that a little bit.
Yeah, actually, Wendell doesn't like this, but one of the things we say is to kick somebody back into play. And so the idea is, and you know, kicking is a violent term, but it takes some energy. You know, you just can't, or maybe pull them to play where they want to, where the issue is at the core of their being, where they're in conflict with what they have to, what the father is trying to get them to release, or hearing something for the first time and total disagreement with that, particularly the person that's saying it to them, and so then they have issue. The issue is really with the wrestling with the father, not us. And they need some coaxing back in, or they need somebody to come alongside them and tell them what we all want to hear. You really are loved, and you really are have value, and we really need you, and we need your perspective. And so we need you to come back. And by the way, you need us to be involved with you. And so so many relationships are so superficial, where there's really not a lot of real meaning in the relationship, and people get used to that. And then when they get just a little taste, and sometimes they're not even a taste, they get a smell of what it really feels like to have an honest to goodness, a real relationship with people that actually really care for them and that and are really there for them. That's incredibly attractive. But when they get there and then they discover issues of who they are that they don't want to deal with, in fact, they've been running from their entire life, if somebody tells them, then they want to go on the roller coaster ride and want to jump out. And it takes a Barnabas, somebody to go alongside them. Like in our scriptures where the Barnabas was come alongside. He said, look, he's the come alongside guy and helps people through it. And so that's what we need.
You think that's who you are?
That's
Come
what Larry
alongside
calls
guy?
me. That's
Huh?
Larry has names for people. I have a name for him. I just can't say it in mixed company.
Don't say his name for me. I'd appreciate that.
I can't say it in mixed company, but he calls me Barnabas sometimes. And so
You are.
and the reason why I'm like that is because somebody's been like that for me. And then I know how important it is. I know how important it is to me. So Larry is, and by the way, the name is Barnabas. Larry is my Barnabas. He's come alongside for me and has been there with me. So people have issue with Larry because Larry's a guy that breaks up the whole hard soil. He does the hard work, and he has this perception about people that is like spot on. In school, I grew up with Larry, and then we call it playing a dozen, right? And so a ranking, some white guys call it a ranking. And so you say something harsh about somebody else, and someone says something harsh about you. Larry was really good at it because he had this perception.
Yeah, I'm sure he was good at that.
What it was the most sensitive about, and zero in on that, right? And so I think that's just a innate ability he has. When that happens, people are like, wow. But there needs to be somebody come alongside to say, well, you've seen some truth, but you really need to be in it. So that's what we do, right? And somebody was like that for me, and so I really feel in my heart I need to be like that for somebody else.
One thing I've come up against in the group that I'd like your guys' thoughts on around intentionality is everyone defines intentionality differently. Like what does it look like to be intentional? I mean, for Wendell, it looks like showing up at 7:00 a.m. every morning and setting up the chairs and then sitting by himself for 15 minutes until the first person shows up. But for him, intentionality means being there right on time and setting up the room. Like that's part of it. And if he were to put that on everyone else, that would be, there'd be some serious hard feelings. Did you want to say something, Wendell, since I just used you?
Well, and criticizing those who show up late and determining that they are less committed and less faithful
WP.
and less important or less desirable, I should say, something like that. Who knows?
Yeah, and there's
But,
some people who show up every week, and there's some people who show up once a month, and there's some people
you bet.
who make the
And-
phone calls during the week, and there's some people who never make there are guys in the group who have never called me, or
Exactly.
whatever. And how do we navigate these waters where everyone's sort of defining intentionality and also making space that maybe one person's intentionality just is different. It's not a matter of good or bad.
Actually, I've become much more open about that as I've gotten older. Larry probably wouldn't agree with that. In fact, I've been amazed when Larry would show up late. I would, be the time police, and he's actually more faithful than I am now. It's amazing to see, at least in timing and some of those things. But hey, that was something wrong with me. I mean, I know that. The only reason I had allocated X amount of time, say from 7 to 8, and then I want to be somewhere else. But I can validate the fact that I'm committed because I'm there at 7 to 8. If you don't show up until 5 minutes to 8, sorry, I'm going to leave. Well, that doesn't look much like love or commitment or intentionality to anybody else who's going to be there from 7 to noon, which Larry often does now, or 7 to 5. I can't imagine how he does that.
You guys stay in for so long. I have about a 3 hour. I have about a 3 hour, and I'm like,
well, part of being intentional is what happens before you get to the meeting.
Right.
It's how you plan your day, and how do you make time available, and and what Greg talks about is important. It's a body ministry, Tony. It's
right.
I used to have a real problem with people who came in and out, and I thought their commitment or their they weren't really a participant, and the Father corrected me about that, and he says, you don't judge people like that. My intentionality for me is who keeps the lights on, because no matter what, is there a place for you to come back to when you're ready? Who are the faithful people that keep the lights on? Who's the guy that keeps the house in order? Who keeps doors open so that whenever, and for whatever reason, you're ready to come back, there's a place to go. I remember my mother lived in the same place for years. I took that for granted. But no matter where I was in the entire planet, my mother had the same phone number. I could call her, and I knew she'd be there. And I knew if I came back, she would be there. And it wasn't until she was no longer able to do that in her older age that I realized how significant that was. And just somebody who keeps the lights on, man. And if there's a place where we can, whenever you're ready to come back or deal, you know where to go, and somebody's there. And the real faithfulness is not in any one of our performances. It's that our Father is the one,
right,
that kept these doors open and said, there's a place for you.
Keeps his eyes on the horizon.
And when you come back, Tony, people still remember you, right?
That's right.
For better or worse, you're not coming back and have to come through a bunch of strangers. You come back and people, Tony,
I love
where
it.
you been, bro? And we pick
Tony,
up right where you left.
That's
That's a God-given blessing right there, man. The only Father can do that. Only Father can do that. But we got to get over some things about what we think commitment means, what we think intentionality means, what we think purpose means, because they all fall short of that. Because they're all self-serving. And when you get past yourself and be considerate of other people, then that's the part that keeps the lights on. I remember sitting there at window. I remember a few times sitting there by myself and thinking to myself, what am I doing here? And and the Father would always remind me of why I was there. And so I think the intentionality part is what you do to prepare yourself to be there before you're there. Why am I coming? What is this? Why do I get up when nobody else may be there? What is it? Because I'm serving my Father as I minister to his people. It's not ministering to my people, it's serving my Father. And once I understand that this is a service, this is how I praise and worship him, then I'm going to show up. And I'm going to show up if nobody else shows up. And when you get a lot of people, and I found out is when you do that and you keep the doors open, people will come. And
well,
so,
one of the things about that I think is so real is as God changes my heart, you're ready to receive the person when he comes back, not in judgment, but in love. Every time Tony would come back, I would be thankful that he came back. Every time Janus came back, I'd be thankful that he came back. When Greg was gone for different periods of time, I would be thankful that he came back. There's many people that I even identified and said, you need to come back, we need you. And it's been gratifying to see how they have kind of filled that space with the love that the Father's filled them with for others. It's that's essentially what it's about, as I see it. Yeah, there's an intentionality in showing up, and yet, if you love God and love those that are present, absent, or in flux, who's to say? But he keeps bringing them. And needless to say, the Father brings some people that are difficult and perhaps hard to get along with.
sure.
Every time I think I got it wired, I meet somebody else I have a hard time getting along with.
So I do think, though, that there is a role for the body to seek those out who have been among us and have gone. And we should be able to do both. But we need to make sure that there's a place for people to come back to.
That's right.
That's as important as going out and pursuing people. And I think there is a role for that to happen too. I don't think one should be at the expense of the other, though.
Right. So we have structured aspects of our community, like 7:00 every Friday morning. We meet and it goes until 11, 12, 2, 5, whatever. Some of us gather on Saturdays as well. We do have these structured. Nate Moreland has a workout that Wendell's very excited about. His
Right.
coffee cup crush.
And you're all invited.
Right. But then so much of it is unstructured. So much of real community doesn't fit on a calendar in that structured kind of way. Can you guys speak into that a little bit? And Greg, I know you're actually the expert at this, I feel like.
That's interesting. I think a lot of what happens with people, Friday is one day a week, but relationship and commitment to each other is not just Friday, but it's all the other days. And so sometimes I'm led to single people out, or they just and then be available for relationship with them. Or somebody is feeling bad or on the outs or whatever, and then you try to have a lunch or try to have some time with them. I smoke cigars. I actually like cigars and scotch and whiskey and cognac, and so I would invite other people to be able to do the same thing, and so or play dominoes or backgammon. All those social things that allow people to come together and then and develop a community. And so I just, one thing I got from Larry, just include people in the things that you like to do. And then when you do that, sometimes that's enough. And so that's what I like to do. When I'm with my grandkids, I don't have a plan for them. I just include them in what I like to do, and take them to every place I go. And then
you take my kids too.
Tony, unlike you, I actually like your kids, but particularly your wife. I love Amy, and so and then and being led. You have a son that is really into mechanics, and I really need to put some more energy into. And by the way, really needs uncle, And
Yeah.
so I really need to be more intentional about including him in some of the mechanical stuff I want to do. So, and I've been having, anyway, I've been moved to do that, inspired to do that. So I hope that answered your question.
Totally. Janus, you got any thoughts on this, since you've been gone and gotten a few times, and
Yeah. Intentionality is high risk. There's a high cost associated with that. And we say in Friday Group, it may not cost me anything, but it definitely costs somebody something.
Sure.
And when we're intentional in this particular group, we're doing a lot of things. We're suspending our core belief system. We're trusting in, people we may not, have fellowship with. And so why do we do this? For me, I do it to see what happens next. And when I first came to the Friday Group, everybody's talking about God, Yeshua, God the Father. And I wasn't raised in the church. I wasn't raised with theology. I'm for the most part, a science kid. So that that presents deep conflict. But what I experienced was, in the midst of uncertainty, when I suspended my belief system, God happened next. Because things happen that you can't explain. You can't explain with science. You can't explain it with, the things you learn. And so intentionality and the cost of intentionality, yeah, you get to see what everybody's talking about. You get to be a part of it. God happens next. And the way that we define that is up to the individual. It depends on, how much skin you got in the game. Agreement is low cost.
Yeah.
Intentionality costs you everything. And I've been here for 10 years. In the midst of uncertainty, God happens next. That's why I keep showing up. That's why we have to go get other people when they run. I tell everybody who run, when I go and get them, I was like, look, stay to the end, because the best happens at the end.
All right, let's I'm going to say something that some people aren't going to like. And
Oh no, not you, Tony.
Church is a fraud when it is a building you show up to, dressed in a costume, talking in a certain rehearsed scripts, where you stare at the back of other people's heads and no real relationship is actually happening, where you go to watch a show for 75 minutes and then go home, surrounded by people who look just like you.
Preferably 60 minutes.
Okay. I cannot find that in my Bible. I cannot find that. And yet that is how we've defined the church. And I don't know that the church can exist if it doesn't actually practice the things that we're called to. So I'm just going to read a few things for you guys that are just simple commands from the scriptures that I think require what we do. Or no, we do it poorly. We are not the model. Strive to be much more than this little circle of bullshit that we're just trying to figure out every week. We need to want to be more than that. Be at peace with one another. Accept one another. Don't bite, devour, and consume one another. Don't envy one another. Patiently tolerate one another. Be kind, tenderhearted, and forgiving. Bear with one another. Seek good for one another. Don't complain against one another. Confess your sins to one another. Tolerate one another in love. Be devoted to one another. Give preference to one another with honor. Don't be haughty, but find the same mind. Serve one another. Be subject to one another. Regard one another as more important than yourself. clothe yourselves with humility towards one another. Bear one another's burdens, speak truth to one another, don't lie to one another, confront one another concerning the resurrection. Encourage and build up one another, stimulate one another to love and good deeds, pray for one another, be hospitable to one another. These are the commands of the New Testament when speaking of the community of faith. Final thoughts. Janus?
Not really. I'm, it's crazy. I'm impacted even by this meeting. I mean, it feels closer to, when we have Friday group. So this is a good one for me, for whatever that's worth.
Thanks, brother. Greg, final thought?
I like the conversation. Hopefully people will be able to hear this podcast, and then the people that are hearing the podcast could share with other people that they think need to hear the podcast, because I think this topic is really important.
Wendell?
There's a scripture that says, don't neglect the assembling of yourselves together. And I would hope that some of the folks that hear the podcast would join the Zoom call on Friday.
Larry?
So we know that religion is a lie. What you read is the command of fellowship, treat one another. We know that relationship is often on our terms. We decide how we're going to be in a relationship, but fellowship is on the Father's terms. To enter into fellowship, into a covenant agreement, is what the Father has declared to be right. And that's what you read, and that's how we are to deal with it. So we can have relationship, and a lot of things start relationship, but those, remember, that's always on our terms, and we decide how and who and what we want a relationship with. As we enter into fellowship, as we enter into the assembly of those who would be obedient, then that is determined by our Father. And that is the area where he removes sin, he delivers us from ourselves. We can find hope. And true relationships is in the fellowship. So there's a difference between the two. Recognize where you are and be thankful.
Well, thank you all. I can point to 100 things that why I value this community. I can point to 100 times that we've been together, birthday parties and hangouts, smoking cigars, and my kids' baptisms and our kids' weddings and all the things. But when I think of y'all often, it's my mom's funeral.
And so it's at a time such as this that we ought to remind each other that the best thing we can do for each other right now is to stand before our Father on the behalf of each one of us. There is life. And it's not just life now, but it's life everlasting. So that the loved ones that passed on from this life, we will get to see again in paradise. And I'm not talking about heaven. I'm talking about on earth.
Amen.
Amen.
Love you guys. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Good Thanksgiving.
See you on Friday.
Be blessed of Yah, everyone.